takes it in overtime. Brady can shot, breakaway shoots, scores!
Welcome to Sens Talk. My name is Brandon and I am your host. Today, we're going to take a look at prospects, Senator prospects, and which ones might have the best chance to play for your Ottawa Senators this season. Now, I'm going to break down this video into two sections. One, the likely call-ups, those who might make the team out of opening camp or, just get call-ups throughout the season. And, of course, some long-shot potential prospects as well. Now, I'm not going to include players that have played 15-plus games so far in the National Hockey League, specifically last season. That would include, of course, Jacob Bernard-Docker, who played 19 games, Ridley Gregg, who played in 20, compiling 9 points in those 20, and, of course, Matt Sogard, who will likely start in Belleville as their starting goaltender this year, splitting duties with Levi Merlainen, who I as well will not include in this video, just because with the goaltending tandem we have right now, it's unlikely they play any NHL minutes at a consistent basis, unless, unfortunately, there's a major injury. So those two, I don't see really starting many games unless it's a spot start. Ridley Gregg is expected to be on that third line for the Ottawa Senators this season, especially after essentially a point every 2 games last year in the NHL, 9 points in 20 games. And of course, JBD, with him being waiver eligible, looks to be locked in as at least the 6th or 7th defenseman, especially with the fact that Pierre Dorion has said it's his spot to lose. Now with that, let's take a look at the most likely call-ups for your Ottawa Senators going into this season and, of course, into the camp. So to start off this video, I think it makes the most sense to start off with the Clev bomb, Tyler Kleven, who frankly, in my opinion, might have the best chance out of all the prospects we'll talk about today to consistently play in the NHL this year. He played in 8 games last season, compiling 2 points at the end of last year after dominating in North Dakota of the NCAA and did not look out of place whatsoever. He has a thunderous slap shot, and his physical attributes make him Mark Mathot-like. He's physically ready, beyond physically ready for the NHL, but the Sens may elect to run with JBD and Hamonic as their 6th and 7th defensemen, especially with Hamonic being brought back on that contract in free agency, and of course JBD being waiver eligible. They might elect to have Kleven start in, Belleville and marinate down there in the AHL. Kind of like what they did with Ridley Gregg last year. There's a good chance that we will see him at least for 1/3 of the year, 20-30 games or so, maybe even more depending on injuries and how he performs at camp and preseason. But I could fully, I really cannot stress this enough, I can fully see him making the team out of camp, and the Sens maybe even sending down Jacob Bernard-Docker through waivers, because Tyler Kleven is a second-round pick from a couple years ago, like I already mentioned, dominated the NCAA, and in his first 8 games of the NHL last year, did not look out of place whatsoever. And I always say this about NCAA prospects. They're always physically ready out of the gate, coming out of the NCAA to perform in the NHL. NCAA prospects, more often than not, are easier in transitioning to the NHL or pro game than players in the CHL, for example, purely because the NCAA is a far more physical, demanding type of league. So for Tyler Kleven, who has by far his best attribute being, a physical defender, he's not going to be out of place whatsoever if he makes the lineup next year out of camp or gets called up. But once again, just like Ridley Gregg, and we've seen quite often with top prospects, the Ottawa Senators like to marinate them in Belleville. Don't rush it. Take your time, and really with this blue line we have right now here in Ottawa, there's no rush. So once again, for Tyler Kleven, he's NHL ready, but I think they just want to give him some more AHL time to really develop his game, to make him even better. But once again, I definitely think he at least plays 1/3 of the season, maybe even more, but roughly around there, because this guy is NHL ready and his physical attributes are fantastic. And I'd love to see him on the penalty kill next year as well, potentially, at the very least in Belleville, but of course in Ottawa. Now, Igor Sokolov is an interesting one here. It's a big year for the 2020 second-round draft pick. He still is an RFA at the time of this video recording, which is, of course, the day you're watching this video, but he's expected to sign soon. There's really no concern around that. He did play in 5 NHL games last year, scoring his first NHL goal and as well getting an assist for 2 points in 5 games. But in the AHL in 70 games, he dominated, putting up 59 points. He's also the Belleville all-time leading scorer, and he really has nothing left to prove in the minors. He's been working this offseason with skating coach Shelly Kettles, which is great to see, because look, he desperately needs to work on his skating, which in my opinion is what is holding him back from truly being a consistent, NHL player. He could be perfect for that bottom 6. He's a scoring threat, he's a physical player, he's a big player, but his skating just, in my opinion, cannot keep up with some of the NHL talent out there right now. And especially in that bottom six, when you're going to be relied on to play, defensively sound and keep up with the play, back check, be physical. You don't want to be out of place, especially on that bottom six. You want to give up a lot of goals on that third or fourth line. When you're out there, you want to be able to contribute any way you can. And Sokolov can do so offensively, no doubt, but his skating, once again, is absolutely holding him back. So, Ottawa right now, they have a lot of bang and crash guys in the NHL depth pool, like McEwen and Parker Kelly, Kaslik, the list goes on. So maybe because of that, Igor Sokolov can find his way into the lineup with a big camp in preseason and bring another scoring element to the Ottawa Senator bottom six. They have Kubalik, they have Ridley Gregg, they have Shane Pinto, Matthew Joseph. Maybe he can be that extra element that can provide even more offense to the bottom six. But once again, if that's going to happen, because once again, he has nothing to prove in the minors anymore. He's absolutely dominant in the AHL with the Belleville Senators. It's all about his skating and whether or not he can keep up. So for Igor Sokolov, he's likely going to get a one-year contract extension. It's the biggest season of his hockey career, in my opinion. I hope he makes it. He's a friend of the show. He's a great guy, absolute beauty. Really interacts well with Sens fans, fan favorite. And I do hope he makes the team out of camp, or at the very least, gets a real shot this year in the NHL. Most of the time last year, he was getting between 5 to 7 minutes in the NHL. He just really needs to work on that skating, and I really do hope he does so. He's working with Shelly Kettles, which is always a good sign. She's fantastic. So I really do hope that Igor Sokolov can really transition to the NHL this year, make a big impression, and stick in the National Hockey League. Now, will he play a full season? That's unlikely. But if he's playing primarily in the AHL again this year, his time in the Sens organization, without a doubt, is running out. Now, Angus Crookshank is an interesting one here because, look, a couple years ago at the rookie tournament, he tore his ACL, and last year he played his first ever full pro season, and he had a breakout season. He was absolutely fantastic and forced himself back into the conversation for potential call-ups or players or prospects, to make it out of camp this year, because Angus Crookshank, coming off an ACL tear, had a breakout season in 71 AHL games. He put up 47 points, 26 goals, only 4 goals away from being a 30-goal scorer in his first ever pro season. This guy, for quite some time, has been an under-the-radar type of prospect. In New Hampshire, for example, in the NCAA, if you watch his highlights, this guy's got some nifty hands. He was always seen, especially by me, but a lot of people probably watching this as well, as a slept-on prospect. And last year in Belleville really showed why. This guy is completely underrated, very under the radar around the National Hockey League. And I think within the next couple of years that Angus Crookshank should absolutely get an opportunity in the National Hockey League. Now, will that be this year? Yes and no. Will he make the team out of the camp? Probably not, because they want him to play more, AHL games, especially coming off of that ACL injury. Once again, though, he had an impressive season last year in Belleville, 47 points in 71 AHL games. So for a guy like that, they absolutely have to give him consideration at the very least to be a call-up throughout the season, especially since he's known for his chirping and peskiness. That's ideal, for your bottom six, especially on your third or fourth line. Crooker's an ideal fit for that bottom six. And he can also provide a physical and offensive edge to his game. 26 goals is not easy to do in the AHL as a rookie coming off an ACL injury. So he absolutely has, that offensive edge to his game as well. But physically and just, mind games, this guy is perfect for the bottom six. He's exactly the type of player that you want on your team, but not to be playing against. So once again, I think since he's only had one full pro season under his belt, it's unlikely he makes the team out of camp. But, and I have to say this, I'm a little biased. He's a friend of the show, has treated me very well. He's a beauty. But I don't think this is even biased. I think many of you guys would agree with this as well. I think absolutely he will be called up for an extended look some point this year, mark my words. But more importantly, I think by this time next year, going into next camp, I think he makes the team out of camp. I think by next year, he should be playing consistent minutes in the National Hockey League. That's how confident I am about a prospect like this with Angus Crookshank. He is so good at so many different little things, and he's exactly what you want in that bottom six. And with the upcoming cap crunch that the Ottawa Senators are going to have to face, Angus Crookshank is one of those players on a cheap contract that might be able to fill in for the Ottawa Senators. Now for this year, once again, he should get some games, but definitely not the full season. Now, another player that's really intriguing is Roby Järventie. Now, Järventie was the 33rd overall selection back in 2022, and he has a massive year ahead of him. Like his Belleville teammate, Igor Sokolov, he's battled some injuries, especially last year, but Roby, when healthy, was nearly a point-per-game player in the AHL as he put up 30 points, 16 goals in 40 games. Now, while he should see at least a few games in the NHL this season, especially if the team is struggling to score, I'm not sure he'll stick around long term unless there's an injury in our top 6 here in Ottawa. Jarventie is an offensive-minded, shoot-first type of player, and DJ Smith, the head coach of the Ottawa Senators, likely would not want a rookie offensive-minded left winger on his 4th line, especially with Roby Jarventie's injury history. I feel they give him another year in Belleville to marinate, just like Cruikshank and maybe even Clevin, but I definitely think he'll get some games in the NHL this year, especially if, once again, if we're struggling to score, if the power play is struggling to click, he's a good power play scorer, and especially if Ottawa has an injury in their top 6, especially, or particularly, on the wings. But for a guy like this, who barely played half the season last year in the AHL, there's no doubt in my mind he at least starts in the AHL, maybe gets a call-up midway through the year, just like really Greg last year. He's got potential. He's got, a very good shot. He has a decent chance to be an NHL player for sure. I just don't know if that's going to be this year at a consistent basis. Now with that, those are all the players, in my opinion, who absolutely get at least a few games to the National Hockey League this year. Now let's take a look at some long shots who may get a game or two, but definitely should be on the radar for a potential call-up. So now let's take a look at some of the quote-unquote long shot prospects who may get some appearances in the NHL this year with your Ottawa Senators. Let's start it off with Lassie Thompson, because Lassie Thompson is a long shot, frankly, due to his inconsistent play, injury history, and being leapfrogged, frankly, by multiple defensive prospects like Tyler Clevin and Jacob Bernard Docker. He may get some NHL minutes this year, as he has already gotten in the past. He's played some NHL minutes before. He's gotten between 30 to 40 games in the NHL so far. But his time in Ottawa appears to be running out, especially with some of the not so encouraging comments from GM Pierre Dorion on his progression. And I think this, once again, is a shame, because I think Lassie Thompson, as I've mentioned many times before, if you watch my videos, you know this. I believe Lassie Thompson still has the potential to be a solid second-pairing, two-way defenseman. He's shown glimpses of great potential here in the National Hockey League in Ottawa, especially during that COVID year. But that injury last season really derailed his progression, with JBD and Clevin now in the mix, and Hamnick brought back, and our elite defensive blue line of Chabot and Chychrun and Zub and Sanderson. There doesn't really seem to be a path forward here for Lassie Thompson, especially with the fact he was drafted back in 2019 in the first round. He really just isn't where I think many, including myself, many of you guys watching this as well, wanted him to be or expected him to be. So he might get some minutes in the National Hockey League this year, but I think, once again, if he's not making it out of camp, and it's unlikely he does so, he'll likely be with another NHL organization after this year. I still think, once again, he has NHL potential. I just don't think it's going to be with the Ottawa Senators long term. Now, another long shot prospect who, frankly, in my opinion, is not getting spoken about enough is Maxime Gannett. And he's a very under-the-radar defensive prospect purely because he was selected in the 7th round a couple years ago. He's not a big-name guy, but the guy puts up big-name points. He put up 40 points in 72 games last year as a defenseman in Belleville of the AHL, and even made an NHL appearance last year with 1 game registered. The only reason he doesn't have a great shot at playing consistent minutes next year is due to the other 2 D prospects I've already named, and of course our crowded blue line. And I think that's a shame, and it's really unfair, because Maxime Gannett last year with Belleville was the leader on the blue line, offensively speaking. This guy, especially as a young prospect, really put up some good numbers. 40 points in 72 games is not something to laugh at. I think this is a guy that should get a handful of games, between 2 to 5 maybe this year, if there's injuries. But once again, because of that crowded blue line and the prospects ahead of him, even Lassie Thompson, just because of where he was drafted and his experience already in the NHL, likely will get that call-up over him. It's really unfair for him, but I just don't see a path for him, at least this year. But I hope the Ottawa Senators keep him in the organization for a long term, because I think there's a very good chance this guy can turn out into something, at the very least, a third-pairing guy. But I'm really excited to see what he can do again going into this season in the AHL with the Belleville Senators. They brought in some very good AHL free agents, so the Belleville team is going to be much improved. So I'm really excited to see how Gannett can respond to that, and hopefully even get better than last year. But once again, because of that crowded blue line, he may get a few games, but really nothing consistent for sure. Now, Cole Reinhardt, like Gannett, also made his first NHL appearance last year and was named by Pierre Dorion in an interview just a couple months ago as a potential prospect to push for a spot this year. With a big camp, he truly could carve himself into a role here in the nation's capital, maybe even get a handful, maybe even more than 10 NHL appearances, especially if injuries occur. And this may come as a surprise for some of you, but it really shouldn't. Last year in Belleville, he put up 66 games with 34 points and 11 goals. Not something to really, it's not something that's highlight reel, but this is a guy that's put up consistent numbers in the AHL. And as a depth guy that needs a spot call-up, especially on an emergency basis, if there's an injury in the bottom six, this is the kind of guy that maybe can contribute with a couple of goals here and there, but more importantly, can play physical, can keep up. He's a decent enough skater. This is the type of guy that maybe can be called up a few times a year for that spot type of call-up if they need a bang and crash type of guy in that bottom six to fill in on the penalty kill as well. Cole Reinhardt is that type of guy. He can absolutely step in. And unfortunately, unlike Gannett, there's a real path here for Cole Reinhardt to get some NHL minutes next year, purely because there's, of course, more positions in the forward core, but as well, the bottom six by no means is settled. Maybe the third line is settled, but that fourth line is wide open, and I have a good feeling we're going to see some consistent movement in that bottom line on that fourth line. So Cole Reinhardt is the type of guy that might get a few games there, especially with a big camp. So we'll see what happens, but that's the type of guy that you'll absolutely see on a spot call-up. The last prospect I want to mention is somebody you guys have probably been screaming at your screen for the last 15 or so minutes, is Zach Ossipchuk. This is the type of player who Ottawa fans should keep an eye on, purely because he's one of the best prospects in our system right now. He put up 67 points, 31 goals in 56 WHL games last year. He also impressed the World Juniors with 3 points, 7 games, and is quickly rising the Sens prospect ranks and may get a taste of the NHL late in the season, like others I've already mentioned, like Cole Reinhardt or Maxime Gannett. Now, expect a big season in Belleville for Ossipchuk, who many are already picking as a dark horse to make it out of camp this year. I think it's far too early. He's too young of a prospect. He's never played pro hockey before. He needs to play pro hockey. He's far too raw, too young, but he has the physical attributes in the frame and scoring ability to be a solid NHLer in the future. Once again, he may get a game or two, but like Ottawa's done many times the last few years, there's no doubt in my mind they're going to marinate him down in Belleville on a much improved Belleville team. And yeah, maybe he'll get a game or two, but maybe next year, like Angus Crookshank and a couple others that I mentioned in this video, he should get a much better chance to make that lineup. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. As always, was I right? Was I wrong? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? What was my most outrageous take and my most spot on take? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. As usual, look forward to responding and debating with you guys as usual down there in the comment section. And besides that, I'll see you all very soon. Go Sens, go.